Hi, this is Wayne Hall back with another comic that you can buy through your local shop. Although I might change that a little this week to a comic that I bought in a local shop. And it's this crazy book right here. It's called Elmer. Let me read the description on top. It's the Great Filipino Novel with chickens. I'm sure I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but it's Jerry Alan, I think. Let me read what the book is about to you. Elmer is a window into a world where chickens have suddenly acquired the intelligence and consciousness of humans, where they can now consider themselves a race no different than browns, blacks, or whites. Recognizing themselves to be sentient, the inexplicably evolved chickens push to attain rights for themselves as the newest members of the human race. Originally self published by the author in the Philippines, this is the first U.S. edition of the book and the first edition to be made available to the book and library trade. And it looks very much like this one. Um, it's a really interesting book. This, you understand, this book was actually printed in 2010. That's about 10 years ago, and that's several years before Animosity came out from Boom Studios. Animosity, of course, all the animals have a consciousness and they can interact and talk and they can think and plan, things like that. The only group that this hits in this book are the chickens, and you can see the Elmer is right there, the chicken of the good things. And it's a book that's done in black and white. And you can see here's one of the chickens right there. And Farmer Ben is one of the guys that they interact with, who's really helpful to them. It just kind of comes out of the blue, and I don't think they ever explain how the chickens get that. But this is kind of a parable as to what it's like to be, persecuted and to be taken advantage of and things like that. Of course, the added element is the fact that a lot of people like to eat the chickens, and that's something that really is a fascinating part of it. What happens if something that you would normally prey upon was suddenly something intelligent enough to interact with you? And it's a fascinating story about that. I did want to mention a couple of things about this book. I said I bought this in a bookstore. There's a bookstore up in Maryland. It's near the University of Maryland. It's a comic book store, but they also sell other books. There was a guy who used to work there by the name of Topham, and he used to know that I liked variety in my reading. I liked things that were unusual, and they were a little different and a little challenging, the kinds of things I liked. And so he was the one that suggested this book to me. And I took it home, and at first I thought, a book about chickens. How good can this be? And then especially I looked and I saw the black and white inside, and I thought, ugh, this is not going to be good. But hey, I trusted his judgment. I took it home, and one thing I should mention too is that this is a graphic novel for mature readers. You're going to see four-letter words. You're even going to see some sexual circumstances in this book, believe it or not. And it's all about how these chickens, they're trying to make it in a world that wants to eat them, basically. And that's just a tough thing. It's not just enough to, they show them in parades and stuff like that. There's all kinds of things they're trying to do. It's really intelligently written. That's one of the things about this book that I really like. There's arguments among the chickens themselves as to how to get along. There are people who really are against them being treated fairly. And like I said, there's guys who want to eat them. And so it's just an amazing thing. It even gets to the United Nations at some point, all this whole thing. And so it's really a parable about people and how we treat people that are different from us on a purest sense. Now, remember, this is 2010. So this is a while back. Like I said, Animosity came along, and I remember when I read Animosity for the first time, and I looked down, and there were two dogs at my feet, and I thought, what are they really thinking? And this is the case, but it's a funny thing to say, but it's a very human story. It's a very compassionate story. It's even the chickens have a lot of variety amongst themselves. It starts out with one of the chickens, interestingly enough, who's applying for work, and you don't know it's a chicken right away. It takes a little while. And then we find out it's a chicken who's applying for a job. And he can see that there are humans around, and the humans are being treated a lot better than he ever would be. And he gets angry about it. He's got very bad temper, and he, he gets beaten up at this office, which is really weird. What's funny is they when they have like holidays, they eat turkey. I found that really odd, the kinds of stuff. There's a lot of really interesting things about it, about how they interact with each other, about what kinds of things they do, and even their friends sometimes turn on them. So they can't really trust everybody, even each other. So it's a very strong parable about how we treat each other. And there's a picture I just passed that I wanted to show you guys. At some point, they all go nuts and they attack the chicken. The people do, because it's hard to change generations of people who have looked at them as nothing but food, and now suddenly have to interact with them. It's a really growing story, and it has an interesting ending too. You know, this is one of those books that has a beginning, middle, and end, which I know in comics is a real surprise. X-Men have gone on for decades, and you've got to read every single issue to know what's going on. This book actually ends interestingly, which I liked. And I won't spoil it because I want people to read it. But the fact that it's in the Philippines is really something. Now, the guy who wrote it, I wanted to mention something into. He's a licensed architect, but he has spent years creating comic books. He's actually done work for Marvel and DC and Image, among other stuff. So you get a real interesting perspective on it. And it gives him a way of looking at things that other comics might not take, an approach they might not take. So let's get to the gradings. The writing, this was written and the artwork is all done by the same guy. The writing is pretty crisp, I have to say. The dialogue and stuff is really sharp. And the situations are really interesting too. And the characters are very well developed and interesting to read. So I'd have to give this an A. The artwork, I always kind of grade down when it's black and white. I would have been interested to see this in color, how that would have been. But I have to say the faces, two of the things I judge artwork on: faces, facial expressions, and action sequences. I showed you the one guy lunging at one of the chickens. And, there's a lot of that kind of thing going on. There's a lot of activity. Here's that one again. I found that really, you get a sense of what's going on immediately. So I think the art is good. I wish it was color instead of black and white. I would give it a solid B as a result of that. So the next thing is the lettering. And again, I think it's all done by the same guy. I always grade down on lettering because I always think there's some way to do it. Usually the lettering takes place at the top or the bottom of a panel. And it's okay. I give it a good B minus, I think, on that was good. Literary merit. This is where I think this book is really interesting to read. I think this is a story, again, that I like to say is something even years from now people will read and get a lot out of, because it has profound stories, or profound things that it's dealing with, profound subject matter. So I give this a really good literary merit grade. I give it an A. Fun factor, yeah. By now, if you've watched my reviews, you know fun factor doesn't really happen in these books. There's a couple of crazy things that happen, but it's dark humor. I'd have to give it like a D as far as fun factor goes. Overall grade, I would give this a B+. If you haven't seen it and you get a chance to read Elmer, I would recommend it. It'll challenge your thinking. Believe it or not, it's very compassionate, and it's very interesting on how we get to see things from the chicken's perspectives as well as the humans. So it's a really interesting book on that way. Overall grade, I'd have to give it a B+. It's really, 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 really good. Again, it's something different. I like something different. I want to go where I haven't been before. And that's what Elmer does. So, I highly recommend it. I know it's available on Amazon. I don't know if stores still get it, but it's definitely a book that I would say go after it because it's good stuff. And until next time, keep reading your comics.